The air was cold. Flags hung low in the wind, fluttering over rows of silent mourners gathered for the burial of a decorated officer. Soldiers stood in formation. Civilians clutched folded programs, and the sound of boots on gravel echoed between stones. At the side gate stood Officer Chad Riker, early 40s, white crew cut, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. His authority came in calm, clipped words, and a practiced dance that said, "I'm the law here." A black man approached, walking with calm precision. Dark overcoat, hands visible. No rush, nothing suspicious, except the color of his skin, apparently. "Hey, you can't enter this way," Riker said, stepping in front. The man nodded politely. "I'm attending the service." "I didn't ask why you were here. I asked for ID," Riker barked, hand already drifting to his holster. The man reached inside his coat, slow, careful, and pulled out a small leather wallet. Riker didn't even look. He slapped it down. "Nope, this doesn't look right. Step back, sir. Hands where I can see them." Murmurs started in the background. Some soldiers looked away. Others lowered their eyes. This wasn't new. Then Riker pulled his weapon. A gasp. Not loud. Just a sharp inhale from a nearby veteran who recognized the man now on the wrong end of the gun. Still, the black man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply looked at Riker. Calm, cold, and in that look, something spoke louder than any threat. You just picked the wrong man. What happens when a small badge tries to outrank a war-hardened commander? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like if you've ever seen power abused or reversed. Hit subscribe to see what Officer Riker learns next. Watch to the end. You won't believe who makes the final call. He lived in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew when silence said more. Colonel Marcus Hill, 56. Retired technically, but no one ever really retires from the upper echelons of U.S. Army Command. Not someone like him. Not when his name still lingered on classified briefings and internal networks like a ghost in the system. His house was neat. Every object had its place. No clutter, no decoration, just function. The kitchen was military clean. One mug, one plate, one set of keys, always in the same dish. He woke at 0430, ran 3 miles, breakfast, black coffee, and 2 boiled eggs. The television stayed off. The news didn't tell him anything he didn't already know. Neighbors rarely saw him. Those who did assumed he was a quiet veteran, maybe logistics, maybe intelligence. The kind of man who fades into the background. They didn't know that Marcus had once overseen Black Ops deployment across 2 continents, that his decisions had reshaped borders, that entire teams had followed him without question, and entire nations had reviewed his reports before making their next move. But to the world around him now, he was just another aging black man who walked alone and kept his hands visible. He didn't correct them. He went to the funeral because Captain Ray Delgado had once saved his life. That debt didn't expire. Even if Delgado had been a junior officer, young, bold, gone too soon, Marcus had told himself he would be there. Quiet, respectful, present. He dressed in a civilian coat, but the posture remained unmistakable. Spine straight, boots polished, steps measured. He parked 2 blocks away, walked under gray skies, kept his head down. That's how he liked it. And yet, as he approached the gates, Marcus already noticed things others didn't. 2 patrol cars idling without lights. A new security pattern at the secondary entrance. A young officer on edge, scanning too aggressively. And the one with sunglasses, standing too square, hand too close to the holster. He saw the escalation coming before it happened. He didn't avoid it, because something in Marcus Hill had been waiting. Not for violence, not for revenge, for confirmation. That the world still ran on the same assumptions it always had. That power only wore one kind of face. That authority had a color. That people like him were meant to be tolerated, not respected. They hadn't taken anything from him yet, but they were getting closer. This country loved to forget who built the foundation and who kept the walls from falling. So Marcus didn't carry a grudge. He carried records. He carried access. He carried the truth, weaponized in silence. He had no desire to set the record straight. He wasn't here for justice. Not anymore. He was here to hold the line. The first time Officer Chad Riker laid eyes on Marcus Hill, it wasn't at the funeral. It was 3 days earlier at a small gas station just outside Arlington, the kind of place where cops park for free coffee and an easy presence. Marcus had stopped there too, not for gas, but to replace the batteries in a military-grade GPS tracker he still used out of habit. It should have been nothing. But nothing is exactly what power hates the most when it's not in control. Marcus had pulled into a quiet corner, stepped out of his car, and walked into the store. No rush, no hoodie, no sudden movements. He even held the battery pack in clear view, a dull black unit with a green blinking LED. Riker watched him from the patrol car. Something about him just didn't sit right. "Yo," Riker said to his partner, still chewing on a protein bar. "You see that guy? Old man." "Yeah, walking like he owns the place." His partner didn't look up. "Maybe he does." Riker narrowed his eyes. 5 minutes later, Marcus exited the store. Didn't even glance at the patrol car. Just walked calmly back to his vehicle. Inserted the fresh batteries. Checked the signal. Then Riker stepped out. "Sir," he called, loud enough to make heads turn from across the lot. Marcus didn't flinch. He looked up, paused, then slowly turned toward the voice. "Yes. You mind telling me what you're doing back here?" Riker asked, hand resting on the hilt of his sidearm. Not threatening, but just close enough. "I'm maintaining a piece of equipment," Marcus said calmly. "What kind of equipment?" Marcus held up the device. "Position tracker." "For what?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Not because he was unsure, but because the question was already out of line. "Personal." Riker smirked. "Funny thing, that looks military." Marcus didn't blink. "Does it? You active duty?" "No." "Then why the tracker?" Marcus looked him dead in the eyes. "Because I believe in knowing exactly where I stand." Riker didn't like the tone. It wasn't disrespectful, but it wasn't deferential either. And that, to men like him, was worse. "License and registration," Riker said, stepping forward. Marcus handed them over without hesitation. Everything clean. No record. No violations. But that wasn't the point. Riker went back to his cruiser, ran the info, and came back slower than before. "You been in the service?" he asked, voice cooler now. "Yes." "What branch?" Marcus stared at him for a long beat. "You sure that's the right way to handle this?" It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a challenge. Just a line. A warning. But Riker chuckled and waved it off. "You can go," he said, tossing the documents back like he was doing Marcus a favor. And that was the mistake. Because what Riker didn't know, couldn't have known, was that every second of that encounter was already logged. The moment he pulled Marcus's license, a ping went out through a dormant protocol in a retired system Marcus still had access to. A system that flagged movement, location, and contact, sending encrypted notifications to a server Marcus himself had built 10 years ago during a war no one talks about. Marcus didn't need to fight Riker. He was recording him. Not for court, not for social media, for leverage. The kind of leverage you don't use until it's the last thing you've got left. That night, Marcus reviewed the footage, stored the audio, logged Riker's badge number. He didn't press charges. He didn't file a complaint. He just made a note. Because when a man like Riker picks you out of a crowd once, it's rarely the last time. And Marcus had been preparing for this. Not for him specifically, but for what he represented. 3 days later, at the funeral, Riker didn't even recognize him. Not really. The overcoat, the clean-shaven face, the solemn air. He was just another black man trying to move through a space where he wasn't expected to exist without permission. Marcus had walked through checkpoints in Kandahar, Mosul, Kiev, seen insurgents fake credentials better than any cop in Virginia ever would. He knew when a man was bluffing authority. He also knew when that bluff was about to cost someone everything. As Riker stepped in front of him and demanded ID, again, Marcus didn't get angry. He saw it for what it was, a pattern. Men like Riker didn't need a reason. They just needed routine. Stop the man. Ask the questions. Control the space. Make the rules. It wasn't about law. It was about dominance. And that's what triggered the shift. The crowd behind them started to sense it too. The tension, the imbalance. The quiet burned behind Marcus's stillness, like a man walking into fire, not to escape, but to set the terms. Hands where I can see them. Riker barked, voice climbing. Marcus raised them, deliberately, slowly. No fear, just clarity. Then came a look. That same look from a gas station. The one Riker had ignored. The one that didn't scream or threaten, but simply said, "You think you're in control. You're not." And then Marcus said the line, "You sure that's the right way to handle this?" But this time, he didn't mean it as a question. He meant it as a final warning. And once again, Riker didn't listen. It wasn't the gun that changed things. It was the sound. That subtle, unmistakable click when Riker's finger curled into the trigger guard. Just enough pressure. Just enough intent. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a statement. And that's when Marcus Hill made it official. 3 things happened at once. 1, a soldier at the far end of the procession stiffened. His hand twitched toward his own sidearm, then stopped, remembering protocol. 2, a young boy no more than 8 clutched his mother's hand and stared at the scene, eyes wide with a fear he wouldn't forget. 3, Marcus lowered his hands. Not all the way, just enough to break the script. Just enough to say, "I'm not here to play the part you've written for me. Don't test me," Riker snapped. "I'm not," Marcus replied. His voice was calm, even, almost gentle. "I'm confirming you've crossed the line." Riker blinked. "What?" "You just made it official," Marcus said again, like he was noting a timestamp in a logbook. His hands stayed loose at his sides, open, unthreatening, but everything about him shifted, not physically but energetically, like watching a dormant engine wake up. Riker didn't know what to do. His training had failed him. This wasn't aggression. It wasn't resistance. It was precision. "Get on the ground." Riker yelled louder now, trying to reassert control. "No," Marcus said simply. "That's not the procedure for funeral security protocol. I helped write it." Riker froze. The words didn't compute. Behind them, silence fell over the crowd. People stopped whispering. Phones were recording now, not obvious, but enough. Even the military chaplain, who had been preparing to begin the service, paused. Because they all saw it. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was targeting. Riker's voice cracked. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" Marcus finally looked him in the eye. And there, for the first time, Riker saw something he hadn't before. Authority. Not borrowed. Not bluffing. Not loud. The kind of authority that doesn't need validation because it commands by default. "I don't need to tell you anything," Marcus said. "But I suggest you call your supervisor." "I am the supervisor," Riker shot back. Marcus tilted his head. "No, you're not." He reached into his coat pocket. Riker stiffened. Gun rising, finger tightening. Marcus stopped mid-motion and slowly said, "What you do next determines what happens to you." Then, with perfect clarity and control, he pulled out a phone, typed in a 7-digit code, hit send. No apps, no unlock pattern, no calls, just a ping. 3 seconds later, Riker's radio cracked. "Unit 212, hold position. Do not engage." Repeat. "Do not engage the subject. Stand down immediately." The voice wasn't local dispatch. It was federal. Riker's eyes widened. What the hell? The radio spoke again. Different voice this time. Female. Sharp. Controlled. "Officer Chad Riker. You are to lower your weapon and step away. Colonel Marcus Hill is authorized to proceed. Any interference from your unit will result in federal review." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Riker looked like he'd swallowed battery acid. "Colonel?" Marcus didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't gloat. He simply said, "That's who you just pulled a weapon on." The next 30 seconds unraveled Riker's entire illusion of control. 3 plainclothes men emerged from the rear of the funeral crowd. Defense intelligence liaisons who had been stationed quietly in attendance, now moving with calm urgency toward Marcus. One leaned in and whispered, "We got the alert. Everything's under observation." Marcus nodded. Riker stammered, "Why the hell are they?" Another voice cut him off, this time in person. A lieutenant from the nearby military base. Uniformed, decorated, furious. "You pulled a gun on Colonel Marcus Elijah Hill," she barked. "At a military funeral? I didn't know who he was." Riker shouted. "That's the problem," she said. "You didn't care who he was. You saw a black man you didn't recognize and decided that was reason enough. The crowd wasn't just watching now. They were witnessing. And Riker? He was sinking. Marcus, however, didn't stay for the unraveling. He turned to the chaplain and nodded. Please continue with the service. Then he walked straight past Riker, slow and silent, his coat flapping gently in the breeze. No one stopped him. No one could. As the funeral resumed, Marcus stood at the edge of the honor guard. He didn't stand apart because he was unwelcome. He stood apart because it gave him perspective. He watched Delgado's casket lowered into the earth. He saluted once perfectly, and then as taps played over the still air, he turned his back to the whole damn system that just tried to reduce him to a threat. That night, the footage hit social media. It wasn't the full clip, just enough to show Riker's weapon drawn, Marcus unmoving, and then the voice over the radio confirming his identity. It went viral in 6 hours. High-ranking Army colonel detained at funeral. I helped write that protocol. Black officer stops cop cold. Silence. Stillness. Power. But Marcus didn't post it. He didn't like cameras, or interviews, or spectacle. He liked documentation. And now, everything he needed was in play, because Riker wasn't the real problem. He was the symptom. And now the system that had backed him for years, ignored his misconduct reports, erased complaints, closed internal investigations, was on the table. For the first time in decades, Marcus wasn't reacting. He was initiating. 3 days later, Marcus Hill stood in front of a closed-door marked Federal Inquiry Room 3B. Inside, Officer Chad Riker sat with his jaw locked, tie loosened, fingers tapping the metal table, like a man who still didn't understand how fast things had turned. He wasn't in handcuffs. Not yet. But the energy in the room said it all. This wasn't a conversation. It was a diagnosis. Marcus entered quietly. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't need it. He carried no briefcase, no lawyer, no folder. Just presence. 2 internal affairs agents sat on either side of Riker, flanking him like bookends of an open file. Neither one looked surprised when Marcus walked in. They just nodded. He sat across from Riker. The silence stretched. Riker finally broke it. This is bullshit, *T. Marcus didn't blink. They dragged me in here like I shot someone. You pulled a weapon on a U.S. Army colonel at a military funeral. One agent replied coldly. I didn't know who he was. You didn't ask. Look, he didn't show credentials. He was acting suspicious. And the funeral had civilians and dignitaries present. I followed protocol. Marcus finally spoke. Quiet. Even. Which protocol was that? Riker turned toward him. What? You said you followed protocol. Which one? Riker hesitated. Standard field escalation. Subsection 4. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Just present. That subsection doesn't authorize drawing a weapon unless there's clear threat of violence or an uncooperative subject. I was neither. He didn't comply. I complied. He didn't listen. Marcus reached into his coat. This time, no tension. No twitch from Riker. Just a single sheet of paper, folded once, slid across the table. It was a printout of a security doctrine, classified only at Tier 2. Not top secret, but obscure. The kind of internal language that only surfaces inside Pentagon briefings and military police joint sessions. Riker scanned the header. Joint Base Civ-Mil Protocol Alpha 72 F3. His lips parted slightly. Marcus said, that protocol was drafted after the 2008 Arlington incident. It outlines jurisdictional limits for civilian law enforcement operating at or near military ceremonial events. Section 3, Paragraph 2 explicitly states that civilian officers must request confirmation through chain of command before initiating detainment on any individual suspected of active or former command-level clearance. Riker tried to scoff, but the sound died in his throat. The agent on the left said, We pulled your department logs. You never radioed for confirmation. I didn't know who he. Marcus raised a hand. A small gesture. But I knew who you were, he said. Riker blinked. What? Marcus leaned back in his chair, calm. I've been tracking your behavior for a while now. Not because of me. Because of men like you. Officers with escalating force complaints that vanish. Excessive stops with no filed reports. pulling over black veterans outside of base gates. I warned local liaisons to monitor your activity. I didn't need to know you'd target me. I knew you'd target someone. Riker's jaw tightened. You set me up. Marcus shook his head. You set yourself up the moment you chose your instincts over your oath. Silence filled the room again. But this time, Riker wasn't in control of it. Hours later, Marcus stood outside the room, leaning against the wall. The agents were inside debriefing. He didn't stay. He'd said what needed to be said. As he turned to leave, a familiar voice echoed down the corridor. Colonel Hill. He turned. A young officer, no more than 25, in a standard Class B uniform. Nervous, but firm. Yes, Marcus said. I saw the footage. She hesitated. I wanted to say thank you. For what? For staying calm. Marcus studied her for a moment. I didn't stay calm. I stayed ready. That's different. She nodded slowly. I think I understand. I hope you don't, he replied. Not yet. You're too young to have to. Then he walked. Meanwhile, the media storm had taken its own shape. What started as a few viral clips had turned into a full-blown segment on 3 networks. Marcus's name leaked, not because he gave it, but because someone recognized him. An old staff sergeant who had served under him in Afghanistan tweeted, "That's not just a veteran. That's Marcus Hill. We used to call him the quiet clock. Because when he moved, time stopped for everyone else." The internet ran with it. Articles poured in. Retired Black Army colonel detained at funeral by local cop. Protocol versus prejudice. The real story behind the viral video. How Marcus Hill outsmarted a broken system with one line. But Marcus didn't read them. He wasn't here for the narrative. He was here for the record. The fallout for Riker came fast. First, administrative leave. Then leaked footage from other body cams. Interactions not previously reviewed. Stops that ended too fast. Citizens who had filed complaints but were never contacted again. The DA's office reopened a dormant case from 2021. Internal Affairs froze his access badge. But Riker didn't go quietly. He went loud, held a press conference, claimed entrapment, blamed reverse racism, said he was being targeted for doing his job. A few right-wing outlets picked it up, started spinning. Decorated officer facing woke witch hunt. Another patriot canceled for protecting the public. For a moment it worked. Comment sections turned. People called Marcus a liar, said he staged it, claimed the military was trying to bury a scandal by scapegoating a cop. But then something broke the tide. Marcus didn't respond with a press tour. He responded with a sentence. Just one, posted to a secure forum, then copied to a military subreddit, then screenshot and shared everywhere. I didn't go there to be recognized. I went there to remember someone who gave their life in silence. I just never thought I'd be next. Tens of thousands of shares, followed by testimonials, real ones. A sergeant who said Marcus once stayed up all night writing letters to the families of men who died in an ambush he survived. A nurse who treated him in Ramstein and remembered how he refused pain meds until the enlisted were seen first. A lieutenant who said Marcus saved his career by taking blame for an op that went sideways due to miscommunication, not error. None of it was flashy. None of it was viral sound bites. Just truth, quiet, enduring, unstoppable. And then came the call from the Secretary of Defense. Not public, not political, private. "Colonel Hill," the voice said, "we'd like to ask you something. Not as punishment, not as reward, but as advice. What would you change if it were your call?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then finally, "I'd make sure every officer with a gun and a badge learns what it feels like to walk through a checkpoint with the wrong skin and no assumption of grace." The line went quiet. Then the secretary said, "Understood. They say power is about who speaks the loudest. They're wrong. Power is about who holds the receipts when the noise fades." Marcus Hill had waited years, not for vengeance, but for the exact moment when evidence would matter more than emotion. And that moment came on a Monday morning, 7 o'clock, inside a federal oversight committee's closed session briefing. 12 people at the table, one projector, a folder on each seat labeled, classified / authorization, Hill / eyes only. The screen lit up with the first slide, a map not of terrain, but of incidents. Pins across counties color-coded. Yellow for routine stops, red for documented escalation, black for unresolved complaints. All of them tied to Officer Chad Riker and a handful of colleagues in similar departments. Marcus didn't narrate. He just let it sit for a moment. Then he spoke. These are not isolated mistakes. They're not lapses in training. They're part of a pattern of unchecked power, ignored oversight, and informal immunity, camouflaged in procedural ambiguity. He clicked. Slide 2, body cam footage. Not from a funeral, from 2 years earlier. A stop outside Norfolk. Riker approaching a veteran in uniform, demanding ID, ignoring rank insignia, threatening to detain him for impersonating a federal officer. The vet was real. Bronze Star. Discharged honorably. The footage had been flagged, but buried. Marcus continued. This video was reviewed by Internal Affairs, then dismissed as officer discretion. But watch what happens at the 043 mark. They did. At 043, Riker says, "You people always think that badge gives you something extra." You people. The room fell quiet. Marcus looked at them. That phrase is not in any department's use of force manual, but it appears in nearly a dozen other recordings. Click. Slide 3, a transcript. Line after line of similar phrases, flagged by speech recognition AI that Marcus had set up years ago. A silent system, feeding on public records, filtering audio through filters no one else thought to apply. Pattern recognition isn't just for terrorists, he said quietly. Bias leaves fingerprints. One of the committee members cleared her throat. Colonel Hill, are you saying you've been monitoring law enforcement agencies independently? No, I'm saying I monitored one officer because I recognized a threat pattern the system ignored. And you had legal authority? Marcus tapped the folder. In your hand is a 2019 cross-agency memo signed by 3 Joint Task Force generals, authorizing the retention and analysis of behavioral threat data involving former or current service members at risk of discriminatory profiling. My clearance included those parameters. Another pause. You had this the whole time? Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, I didn't release it before because I believed naively that the system would correct itself, that someone would step in, review the tapes, enforce the rules. He met their eyes. But you didn't. You ignored the signals. You protected the wrong man. Outside the building, the first controlled leak dropped. An anonymous drive uploaded to a secure press contact. Footage from 4 Riker stops. A redacted version of the oversight slide deck. The Norfolk transcript. It wasn't illegal because Marcus hadn't sent it. Someone else had. A clerk inside the committee who had seen enough. By noon, it was everywhere. Evidence mounts against officer in viral funeral incident. Leaked military briefing confirms pattern of abuse. Colonel Marcus Hill spent years documenting what the system ignored. Back at home, Marcus sat in front of an old steel lockbox. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were 5 sealed envelopes, each labeled with a year. 2015. I-1A. Each one contained copies of logs, testimony transcripts, affidavits from soldiers and civilians who had faced the same kind of humiliation he had. Most were black, some Latino, a few white, but poor, the wrong kind in the wrong place. He'd collected them quietly, promised each person the same thing. I'm not taking this to court. I'm building a record, a history. If the system ever turns its back on me, your truth won't be forgotten with it. Now, the system had turned, and the record was ready. Day 3 after the leak, Officer Chad Riker was officially suspended without pay. His union rep called it unlawful targeting. Local media tried to flip the script, framed him as a man overwhelmed by pressure. His wife appeared in an interview, holding back tears, saying, he's not racist. He's just trying to keep people safe. But then came the second drop. Footage from inside the funeral, full clip, the body cam, the look, the line, you just made it official, followed by the radio call. Colonel Marcus Hill is authorized to proceed. That clip shattered the narrative, because no one could say he was threatening. No one could say he resisted. All he did was exist, and the badge panicked. In response, Marcus gave no interviews, no comment, No op-ed. But he did one thing. He released a policy proposal. 6 pages. Mandatory cross-jurisdiction training for civilian officers near military facilities. Independent review boards made up of both civilians and active duty veterans. An AI-powered database for profiling keywords in officer body cam audio. Automatic flagging when patterns emerge. He didn't demand it. He didn't lobby for it. He just posted it online with one sentence. This is what accountability looks like when it doesn't fear the chain of command. That night, Riker went on live TV. A desperate interview. Tried to spin. Shift blame. Say Marcus had an agenda. The host asked, "Did you know who he was?" "No." "Did you ask?" "No." "Why not?" Riker paused. "I didn't think I needed to." That line broke the internet. It trended for 24 hours. Hashtag you didn't ask. Veterans, civilians, officers, activists, all reposting the clip with stories of being ignored, profiled, dismissed, all because someone didn't think they needed to. By Friday, the mayor's office announced a full internal audit of Riker's precinct. 2 officers resigned. 1 detective filed for early retirement. Marcus? He didn't celebrate. He just sat at his kitchen table, poured a single cup of coffee, and opened the envelope marked 2022. Inside was a note from a young corporal, once harassed at a state line checkpoint. "I don't want revenge. I just want to know I wasn't crazy." Marcus whispered to the empty room. "You weren't. Systems don't go down quietly. Not the ones built to protect their own. Not the ones that run on fear, silence, and plausible deniability. And definitely not when someone like Marcus Hill puts their patterns on paper for the world to see. When the truth hits too close, the system doesn't apologize. It strikes back. Day 7 after the footage leaked. It started small, a local reporter getting a tip. Then 2 blogs ran the same headline within minutes. Exclusive. Colonel Marcus Hill under investigation for misuse of military surveillance tools. Then another one. Data privacy breach? Retired Army officer may have illegally collected civilian records. And then it hit the networks. By noon, 5 different anchors were asking the same question. Is Colonel Hill a whistleblower? Or a rogue operator abusing government tech? Marcus wasn't surprised. He didn't flinch when his phone started vibrating nonstop. Didn't react when a producer from a major news network offered him airtime to set the record straight. He knew the playbook. If they can't disprove the truth, they discredit the messenger. The attacks escalated fast. That afternoon, a heavily edited video appeared on social media, supposedly from an old Army debrief. The clip had no context, no timestamp, just Marcus saying, "Sometimes silence works better than due process." The original line? From a classified psychological analysis on insurgency response, taken completely out of context. Didn't matter. In the comment sections, the backlash was instant. So he admits he operates above the law. Typical military thug. Thinks rules don't apply to him. Now, they're all quiet. No salutes for this. For every voice of support, there are 5 more shouting traitor, spy, or dangerous. Marcus didn't answer any of them. Then came the knock. Unmarked suits. 2 agents. A quiet request. "We need to speak with you regarding the leak of confidential files tied to federal employees." Marcus opened the door wider. "Come." No fear. No posturing. Just a man who had already prepared for this. He led them to the living room. No small talk. No coffee offered. Just the sound of gloves snapping on as they removed their evidence kits. "We're here to verify how these documents came into public hands. They were never mine to leak," Marcus said calmly. "If they surfaced, they came from a system that ignored them. We need access to your devices." He reached into a drawer, pulled out 3 phones and a laptop. All clean, all encrypted. You won't find anything you don't already know. One of the agents, a younger man, couldn't help it. "Why did you collect all this?" Marcus met his eyes. "Because I stopped believing in coincidence." That night, a panel show tore into him. 3 talking heads. All fire, no facts. This guy Hill is a narcissist. He endangered officer safety with that leak. He sat on evidence for years and dropped it when it served his own agenda. They didn't mention the funeral, didn't show the full footage. Because now the game wasn't about facts, it was about mud. Throw enough of it, and people stopped remembering who threw first. But Marcus didn't flinch. He opened a locked drive labeled Ghost Box. It contained only 4 things. A full internal memo chain showing that Riker's department had been warned in 2021 about profiling complaints, and ignored them. A signed affidavit from a data officer confirming the video transcript detection software had been cleared under Joint Command Directive 119 Delta. A copy of the email where the committee clerk confirmed the unauthorized leak. A recording 1 minute and 42 seconds of a phone call from a former major general who once told Marcus, "If this ever blows up in your face, we'll all pretend we don't know your name." He backed them up to a secure cloud, printed hard copies, placed them in 3 envelopes, then wrote 3 names: 1 journalist, 1 senator, 1 judge. No threat letters, no grand reveal, just a quiet release mechanism. Not if, but when. Day 10 after the leak, Riker went public again, this time with a lawyer. A full press conference, cameras rolling, flags behind them, all staged. "My client has suffered emotional trauma," the lawyer declared. He was the victim of entrapment by a man with an agenda. This isn't justice. This is a personal vendetta by someone abusing surveillance tools outside their intended scope. They showed photos of Riker's family. They played the edited clip again. They blamed or rushed to judgment by online mobs. It worked for about 4 hours. Then the full, uncut audio dropped. The original military debrief. The complete sentence. Sometimes silence works better than due process. Not because we avoid it, but because in certain fields, process can't reach the battlefield in time. That's why we build systems of internal control, to self-correct. Context changed everything. So did the metadata, which showed the video Riker's team had posted had been trimmed on official police editing software, not a civilian source. Now it was clear they weren't defending themselves. They were manufacturing doubt. The backlash reversed instantly. Hashtag I stand with Marcus trended. Again, dozens of veterans, lawyers, policy analysts came forward, not just to defend him, but to verify his work. Independent data engineers backed his system's legality. One colonel wrote in The Atlantic, "If more men had Marcus Hill's clarity, the military wouldn't be patching holes. We'd be building walls that don't fall." Still, the damage was done. Marcus received threats. His mailbox was burned. One night, his tires were slashed. Even then, he didn't retaliate. He documented, called the fire marshal, filed the report, logged the incident. Quiet, focused, because he knew something the system had forgotten. Loud power burns fast. Silent truth endures. Day 14. The Justice Department released a statement. After reviewing available data, we find no evidence that Colonel Marcus Hill violated any federal laws. His actions fall within his scope of past classified duties and do not constitute a breach of privacy or protocol. No apology, just a clean exoneration. But it wasn't over, because Marcus wasn't playing for vindication. He was playing for reckoning. They twisted footage. They rewrote headlines. They hacked the narrative. But Marcus, he just let truth run its course. Because unlike spin, it doesn't need permission to be believed. Truth doesn't knock. It leaks. It drips. It multiplies. You can suppress a fact. You can bury a complaint. But you can't outrun a pattern. Not when the world has seen it for what it is. And now, the pattern was bleeding through the cracks. Day 17. A middle school teacher from Charlottesville posted a 38-second video to TikTok. Her caption, "I didn't know who he was at the time, but I remember watching this and feeling sick." The clip showed Officer Riker, 3 years prior, outside a veteran's job fair. A black man in a wheelchair, clearly a Marine based on the pins on his blazer, being told he needed to vacate the parking area. No warning, no explanation, just a shove on the wheel rim. "Can't let you block access, sir." The man was crying by the end. The video was shaky. The teacher had recorded it from a distance, behind her car. At the time, she hadn't posted it. Said she was too scared. Now, it hit 1.7 million views in 12 hours. Day 18. A clerk from a municipal office shared something different. A file labeled Riker, Internal Complaint Rejection Letter, dated 2022. She'd printed it before it was deleted. The complaint had been filed by a father whose teenage son had been searched in front of his own home. No probable cause, no ticket, just a suspicious attitude. The document was signed, then stamped closed, unactionable. That father had submitted 3 requests for review, none answered. The clerk had kept the paper. For when it finally mattered, she wrote in her caption. Now it did. Day 19. A janitor from the courthouse uploaded security footage from his overnight shift. It was silent, grainy, time-stamped. It showed Riker, alone in the file room, unlocking a drawer he didn't have clearance for. He didn't take anything, but he opened the case log for a man named Tyrese Walton, arrested in 2018, then cleared with all charges dropped. The file had vanished after that. Now the footage resurfaced. The janitor wrote, "I kept this in a flash drive taped under my mop bucket. I've cleaned up after these men for 10 years. This is me finally making a mess." And then like dominoes, it collapsed. Each piece triggered another. A nurse who attended to Marcus after a roadside IED said she remembered how he refused anesthesia until 2 other wounded soldiers were treated first, one of them Afghan. A Marine recruiter admitted she'd seen Riker harass multiple enlistees at high school fairs. Always the Black or Latino kids. Never filed a complaint. Didn't think it would go anywhere. A mother stepped forward with a voicemail from 2021. Riker had left it after towing her car. The transcript read, "Lady, if you people just follow the rules, we wouldn't have these problems." Same phrase. Again, you people. But the moment that broke the system came from a child. Day 21. A high school senior posted a video. She had been in the crowd at the funeral, sitting with her uncle, a Navy mechanic. She had recorded everything. Not the confrontation, but after. What the media had never shown. The moment when Marcus walked back to the crowd, silent, nodding once to the folded flag in Delgado's widow's hands. The girl's voice in the background said, he didn't even flinch, like he already knew how they'd try to erase him. Her video cut to black, then showed the words, but he built something they can't delete. The clip hit 3.9 million views in 2 days. Even mainstream anchors began shifting tone. No longer allegations. Now evidence mounts. Now reckoning incoming. Marcus said nothing. Still no interviews. Still no statements. But his work spoke louder. The policy draft he'd posted, the 6-page outline, was downloaded over 800,000 times. Veterans groups began signing open letters in support. Civil rights orgs began citing his model as a new blueprint for interagency oversight. One senator, not progressive, not leftist, publicly called the plan a roadmap toward real balance, not reform, correction. A subcommittee scheduled a hearing, but the headline was this: they're not inviting Marcus Hill to testify. They're asking him to advise. Meanwhile, Riker was spiraling. His suspension turned into termination pending federal investigation. His lawyer withdrew. His GoFundMe page, set up to fight the smear campaign, was shut down after users discovered it used falsified testimonials. One review, supposedly from a grateful citizen, had been copy-pasted from a restaurant Yelp page. Embarrassing, but more than that, revealing. The man who once barked orders with a badge now stood alone, not fired by Marcus, exposed by everyone else. And that was the shift. It wasn't Marcus bringing the system down. It was the system cracking under its own weight because he refused to carry it anymore. Day 24. A local newspaper ran a headline no one expected. Department issues formal apology to Colonel Marcus Hill. The statement was short, cold, but clear. Acknowledgement of procedural error. Recognition of Hill's credentials and authority. Admission that bias-influenced judgment may have played a role. Commitment to review all complaints previously dismissed involving Officer Chad Riker. It wasn't justice, but it was a start. Marcus read the statement once, then again, then closed the browser and walked to the cabinet. From inside, he pulled out a wooden box. Delgado's file, the funeral program, a folded copy of the Army's Code of Ethics. At the bottom, sealed in a small black envelope, was a note he had written years ago. The day he retired. They won't remember the rank, only what you protected with it. Stay ready, stay steady, stay silent until it's time to speak. He burned the envelope, then sat and waited, because he knew what came next wasn't about him anymore. It was about what his silence gave birth to. The system didn't break all at once. It cracked in silence. It splintered in courtrooms. It leaked through the mouths of people who once said nothing. And then, without warning, it collapsed. Day 30. The first resignation hit. Deputy Chief Holbrook, the same official who once signed off on Officer Riker's commendations, submitted a one-line letter to the mayor's office. I no longer believe I can lead a department that refuses to see what's directly in front of it. No interview, no press, just that line. 10 minutes later, a class action lawsuit was filed in federal court, Hill versus Riker et al. But Marcus wasn't the only name on the plaintiff list. There were 27 others, all civilians, all victims of stops, searches, detentions, or intimidation by Riker or his precinct between 2016 and 2023. Each story had been dismissed, each complaint closed without merit, each one now validated in front of the world. The case wasn't just civil, it was structural. Day 32. The local news ran a segment called The Thin Blue Lie. They interviewed a retired precinct clerk who admitted shredding internal complaint forms under pressure, a former patrol officer who said rookies were taught which neighborhoods were worth checking twice, a city contractor who helped install police dashcam systems and revealed certain officers had learned how to accidentally disable recording with a timed power cycle. None of them named Marcus Hill, but all of them described the system he had exposed, and now it couldn't unsee itself. Day 35. A leaked email hit the press. It came from inside the mayor's office. Subject: Crisis Response Strategy. Colonel Hill fallout. In it, aides debated whether to invite Marcus to a community reconciliation forum. One aide wrote, "We need to control the optics before this becomes a national policy disaster." The reply from a senior advisor read, "We're already there." Marcus, meanwhile, said nothing. He didn't attend any forums, didn't speak at rallies. He didn't need to, because his silence wasn't passive. It was strategic. He let the files speak, let the resignation speak, let the lawsuit speak. And the country? It finally listened. Day 38. A Senate Oversight Subcommittee held an emergency session. They called in city officials, DOJ reps, civil rights attorneys, and then at the last minute, they added one name to the hearing schedule, not to testify, to consult: Marcus Elijah Hill. The hearing wasn't televised, but a reporter waiting outside asked Marcus a single question. "Colonel, do you believe justice is finally being served?" Marcus paused, then said, "Justice would mean Delgado's widow never had to cry in front of a drawn gun. What we're doing now is damage control." Then he walked past the cameras, not bitter, not boastful, just exactly right. Inside the committee chamber, the tone had changed. No one was asking if something went wrong anymore. They were asking how far it went, how many officers, how many cities, how many buried complaints. One senator held up Marcus's original 6-page proposal. "This isn't a reform plan," she said. "This is a mirror, and we're finally forced to look." Day 41. The police department officially terminated Officer Chad Riker. Not let go, not retired. Terminated for cause. The statement was short, dry, cold. Officer Riker's behavior during the incident involving Colonel Marcus Hill constituted gross misconduct and an egregious breach of duty. Further internal investigation confirmed a pattern of behavior inconsistent with department values. But the damage was done by that afternoon, for other officers had turned in their badges. 3 of them before the press release even hit. One of them left a handwritten note on his locker. He was right. I just didn't want to be the first to say it. Day 45. The mayor held a press conference. This time, no excuses, no unfortunate misunderstanding, no isolated incident. She stood at the podium, face tight, voice steady. We failed, not because we lacked information, but because we lacked the will to act on it. Colonel Hill did our job for us, at risk to himself, with no backup, with no badge, and with more honor than most of us can claim. Then she paused, looked at the crowd, and for that we owe more than an apology. She stepped aside. Behind her, a new sign was unveiled. Marcus E. Hill Civil Oversight Center. A new agency. Independent. Civilian-led. Funded. Empowered. And permanent. Marcus wasn't there. He didn't need his name on a building. But when he was told about it, all he said was, "Only matters if it works." Day 50. The lawsuit proceeded to trial. The court ordered the release of hundreds of hours of body cam footage previously locked under training review status. The footage confirmed everything. Stops made without legal basis. Language used repeatedly. Patterns so obvious. Even the judge commented, "This court is not in the business of interpreting bias." But in this case, bias doesn't need interpretation. It's recorded. And Riker? He tried to countersue. Claimed defamation. Claimed setup. Claimed his rights had been violated. His lawyer resigned halfway through the deposition. On day 52, Riker stood outside the courthouse, alone, trying to speak to reporters. But no one stuck around. The world had moved on, not because it didn't care anymore, but because it had seen the truth and believed the man who brought it. And Marcus? He went home. Same house. Same routine. He ran at 0430, ate 2 eggs, drank black coffee, read quietly. He didn't need to tell the world what he'd done. He documented it, filed it, shared it, let it breathe. The system didn't fall because he shouted. It collapsed because he proved it couldn't stand on its own. The letters started coming 2 weeks after the collapse. Not emails, not tweets, actual letters. Handwritten, folded, some neat, some rushed, some unsigned. Most began the same way. "I didn't know who you were." Marcus Hill read them one by one in silence. Some were only sentence. Others ran pages long. But they weren't apologies, not really. They were something else. Recognition. One came from a former neighbor. "I used to see you walking your dog at night. Always thought you looked serious. Maybe cold. I realize now I was afraid of being wrong about you. And I was..." Another from a retired officer. "I laughed at the first clip. Thought it was just another guy pushing back against protocol. Then I saw the full story. Then I saw myself. And another, unsigned, typed on a cheap typewriter. I worked on your clearance file back in 2009. Saw your name again last month and almost didn't believe it was the same man. It's not. It's so stronger." Marcus didn't reply to any of them. He didn't need to. The letters weren't about seeking his forgiveness. They were about owning their delay, owning the way they watched things happen to him and people like him, and said nothing, not because they agreed, but because they didn't want to be the first to disagree. One day, as Marcus stood outside the post office, a man approached, mid-40s, ball cap, worn jacket, nervous. "Colonel Hill," he asked. Marcus turned, nodded. "Yes." The man paused, looked down, then said, "I was there, at the funeral. I didn't say anything. I saw what happened and I just watched." He didn't cry, didn't ramble. He just stood there, holding the silence like it owed him something. "I didn't know you were somebody," the man finally added. Marcus looked at him. "I was," he said. "That's why it happened." And then he walked away. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even cold. It was just honest. Because Marcus had never wanted to be seen. He'd wanted the truth to be seen. And now people were finally facing it. Across the country, something shifted. Police departments reopened internal reviews that had once been closed for lack of urgency. City councils drafted policy based directly on Hill's 6-page plan. Training programs for civilian officers near military bases were overhauled. Marcus's name wasn't in the footnotes, but his silence was written into the changes. In a podcast interview, a sociologist summed it up. He didn't flip the system by yelling at it. He flipped it by making it answer questions it thought it had buried. Meanwhile, the lawsuit moved forward. Testimonies stacked. Footage surfaced. Former officers admitted to policies that weren't written but strictly followed. We were told who to stop. We were told what looked off. We just didn't write it down. The judge ordered a permanent review board be created, half civilian, half veteran. When asked to name it, the panel voted unanimously the Hill standard, not to honor the man, but to warn the next system what happens when it forgets who it serves. And yet, Marcus never sought a stage. He didn't testify in person. He didn't join the rallies held in his name. He never said, "I told you so," because that was never the point. Then one night, someone knocked on his door. Marcus opened it. A woman stood there, mid-30s, steady gaze, holding an envelope. "I was one of the people who signed off on the footage suppression order in 2022, she said. "It landed on my desk. I marked it routine." She handed him the envelope. Inside, the original complaint form from that Norfolk stop, the one with the veteran in uniform that Riker had harassed. The report was stamped. Subject identified as valid. No further review necessary. It had been marked as resolved. But no one had ever called the man back. "I kept a copy," she said quietly. "Didn't know why. Now I do." Marcus nodded. "Thank you for bringing it," he said. She shook her head. "I'm not here to be thanked. I just didn't want to be remembered as the person who stayed quiet when it mattered." Then she left. Later that night, Marcus added the form to his archive, not to weaponize, to complete the story. He didn't keep records for revenge. He kept them so no one could say they didn't know. 3 weeks later, the veteran from the Norfolk incident was located. He'd moved twice, changed numbers, disappeared from the system, but someone sent him the footage. He contacted the court, left a short statement. "I thought I imagined it. Thought maybe I overreacted. I didn't know people like Marcus Hill existed. I do now." He asked for no compensation, just that his name be cleared publicly. It was in an interview on national radio. A former general was asked, "What's the impact of Marcus Hill in your eyes?" The general paused, then said, "He made the system look in the mirror, and it flinched." One more letter arrived at Marcus's house. This one wasn't handwritten. It was from the Department of Defense. Included a commendation, years overdue, for extraordinary integrity in service to civilian oversight and the armed forces. It was printed on thick paper, gold trim, signed by 4 secretaries. He didn't frame it. He folded it and placed it in a drawer. Beside it, he placed a single sticky note. It read, "They thought it was about rank. It was about responsibility." The place looked the same gravel path, same iron gate, same cracks in the pavement, like time it tried to shake the ground loose, and failed. Marcus Hill walked with slow, steady steps. His hands are bare. No phone, no file, no documents to prove anything anymore. He didn't need proof. He'd left it all behind. And somehow, it still echoed louder than anything he could have carried. He passed a checkpoint. This time no one stopped him. No badges flashed in front of his face. No raised voices. No weapons drawn. The guard just nodded. Not a deep nod. Not reverence, but recognition. He stepped through the gate, walked past the white stone walls and polished benches, until he reached the quiet corridor that led to the chapel. The very place it all started. The funeral, the silence, the gun, the lie that tried to rewrite him. He stopped for a moment, stood still, and listened, not to footsteps, not to voices, but to the absence of noise. It wasn't hollow. It was earned inside the chapel. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, empty pews, clean floors, flags folded tight in triangular cases. Marcus approached the front row. No crowd today. No folded programs. No sobs in the air. Just one name etched on a plaque. Captain Ray Delgado, faithful in fire, still in silence. He placed a hand on the plaque. Didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Because this wasn't goodbye. It was continuity. The man who had once saved Marcus's life was still saving him, even in death. The funeral hadn't exposed something new. It had awakened something long dormant. And Marcus had honored that debt the only way he knew how, by finishing what Delgado couldn't. He sat alone for a while, back straight, palms flat on his knees, not meditating, not mourning, just remembering. Because the older he got, the more he understood. Truth doesn't fade. It waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't shout. It just stands there until people finally see it. After a while, he rose, walked through the side exit, down the hallway, past the door labeled chapel records / staff only. He opened it with an old key. one he still had from his years of service. No one had thought to revoke it. Maybe they didn't realize he still held it. Maybe they knew and let him keep it. Inside a simple office, metal desk, file cabinets, a wall clock that had stopped ticking at some forgotten point. He walked to the desk, opened the top drawer. Inside, just blank paper, pens, a single worn folder. He placed something in it, a folded sheet, hand-labeled, not in memory, in motion. Inside, names, notes, directives, not to expose, to equip. He wasn't leaving instructions. He was leaving foundation, because someone would come after him, someone quieter, someone smarter, someone watching, the way he once watched, waiting for the right moment to say, "That's enough." And when they did, they'd find this drawer, and they'd know they weren't alone. He shut it gently, turned off the light, locked the door behind him, not dramatically, just decisively. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves rustled across the pavement. Flags fluttered high and slow. A single paper cup rolled along the sidewalk, bounced once, then came to rest by the steps. Marcus picked it up, dropped it in the nearest bin. That's who he was, always had been. Not a hero, not a martyr, just a man who handled the things no one else saw. He walked past the administration building, where a new plaque had been mounted the week prior. Marcus E. Hill, U.S. Army Ret. He didn't just serve. He held the line when others let it fray. He didn't stop to look at it. He already knew what it said, because he didn't need credit to confirm the truth. He just needed to know it held. One last place to go. He walked along the outer perimeter of the cemetery. Rows and rows of stones. Some new, some weathered to the point of anonymity. He stopped in front of a small one. No markings yet, but it was reserved. He knew that. A quiet piece of ground for when the time came. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets, not out of fear, not out of reflection, just presence. He whispered to it. They tried to erase me, but what I built didn't need their permission to last. That was the truth, and not because he had toppled some giant, but because he outlasted the silence they thought would protect them. And now, the silence was his. He owned it. He turned and walked, past the grounds, past the benches, past the place where power once pulled a weapon and thought it could define him with it. The world knew his name now, but that was never the goal. The goal was infrastructure, a system that could feel its own weight, a truth that didn't need him to repeat it, a future that didn't need a man like him to suffer first for it to start working. And in that future, somewhere, a young officer would stop herself before escalating. A clerk would pause before marking a complaint closed. A senator would read a bill twice before signing, all because Marcus Hill existed and acted when it counted. Quietly, clearly, unshakably. Back at home, he hung his coat, set his keys in the dish, washed his hands, boiled his eggs, poured his coffee. Routine didn't mean retreat. It meant stability, because after everything, the fights, the footage, the fallout, he'd earned one thing most people never get: peace. Not given, built. And when people asked what changed, they'd hear stories about silence, about structure, about a stare that stopped a badge in its tracks. But most of all, they'd hear about the man who didn't shout, the man who didn't break, the man who held the line and then walked past it, without needing applause, without needing revenge, without needing to be remembered, just known. They tried to erase him, but what he built didn't need their permission to last.